We see really compelling evidence that looks at individuals who identify as having a sense of purpose. We see faster recovery from neurological disorders, less incidence of cancer for individuals who've had a previous experience of a cardiovascular event, so a stroke or heart attack. When they identify as having a sense of purpose on the backside of those experiences, we see a 72% reduction in recurrent risk. There is no drug, no food, no exercise protocol that comes remotely close to what having a sense of purpose can achieve in terms of being able to protect our bodies from the influence of life.
Welcome to Are You Satisfied? A podcast that explores what a deeply satisfying and fulfilling life looks like and how to live it. I'm your host, Dr. Sarah Murphy, award-winning naturopathic doctor. Please welcome today's guest, the amazing Dr. Meghan Walker. She's a naturopathic doctor and entrepologist with work focused on the health optimization of entrepreneurs, game changers, and their businesses. She's founded and sold several businesses, is an award-winning speaker, and hosts the Entrepology podcast. Today, she's here to speak on the importance of knowing and living your purpose. Dr. Meghan Walker, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Sarah.
I'm so excited. This podcast is really just my excuse to talk to really cool people. So you are a naturopathic doctor turned healthcare entrepreneur coach, essentially. I know you do lots of things.
I am. Yeah, essentially. Mm-hmm.
And I know that one of your favorite topics is purpose, life purpose, meaning. So is there a story behind that? What makes you so excited about that topic?
Oh, yeah, thanks. You know, it is something that I just got really curious about. So when I was in practice, I'm not in practice anymore. I worked with patients for about 13 years, and I worked almost exclusively with entrepreneurs. And the interesting thing about working with it, like a single population is you really started to get to understand elements of their mindset. And I realized when my audience was still a mix of entrepreneurs and other people, that the outcomes that I got with my entrepreneurial group were different than the ones that I got for the most part with my non-entrepreneurs. And I was like, that's interesting. And then I started to really delve into it and I started to ask different questions. And what I realized, the entrepreneurs weren't necessarily different, but it skewed to more people who identified as having a distinct purpose in their life, whether that was creating their business or it was like putting their work out into the world. They were like really driven by the vision and impact that their business could have. And so then I was like, my hypothesis suddenly became, well, when people have a sense of purpose, it changes the outcomes with respect to health. So then I started to look at my non-entrepreneurial population. I was like, the ones who get better faster, the ones who come back less, the ones who have less anxiety, who have, heal faster. We can go into the science around it. Those are all people who identify as having a sense of purpose. And it took me a while because I thought maybe it's community, maybe it's other things, but I was like, no, it distinctly is purpose. And so it really started to open up the doors for a fascination on my part as a clinician to really understand what is the science behind it? What does the literature behind this say? But there is a really distinct body of knowledge and science that looks at the role that purpose can play for us, not just psychologically, but physiologically. And I became obsessed with unpacking it.
I love it. So what I'm hearing is that purpose really does lead to increased health, increased happiness, increased success in business too.
All of the above.
All of it.
It changes our physiological landscape. So one of the things that was really interesting when we started to look at cortisol curves of individuals who identified as having a sense of purpose in their life is we saw these blunted exaggerations of cortisol influence. We didn't see as much what we call in the naturopathic world adrenal fatigue. We didn't see the influences of chronic elevated cortisol. In fact, what we saw was a blunted stress response. So purpose in and of itself has this protective capacity within our bodies. And then, there's a translation of this. We see really compelling evidence that looks at individuals who identify as having a sense of purpose. We see faster recovery from neurological disorders, less incidence of cancer for individuals who've had a previous experience of a cardiovascular event, so a stroke or heart attack. When they identify as having a sense of purpose on the backside of those experiences, we see a 72% reduction in recurrent risk. There is no drug, no food, no exercise protocol that comes remotely close to what having a sense of purpose can achieve in terms of being able to protect our bodies from the influence of life.
I was just thinking about that, how that sounds better than any pill, and the ability to do all that is amazing. And stress, such a big health impact on people. So the fact that we can alter that just by our mindset and purpose in life is amazing. Now, do you think that we are born with a purpose, or do we create it?
I think we all have an inherent capacity to live our life on purpose and in alignment with our purpose. I don't think this is a question of like, some people are better entrepreneurs and some people aren't. If you would like to have access to it, you can have access to it. What happens, I think, for most people is they're not willing to make or not able, I want to be really clear, or able to make the decisions that enable them to lean into what that sense of purpose is. And by not able, maybe it is a family or financial situation that you're like, I am just so heads down having to manage something. I don't have time or space to be able to look at this. Although I would argue that there are ways to be able to access that piece. I think for a lot of people, their inability to access it actually comes from a lack of exposure around these types of conversations. So they're not sitting around the dining room table being like, hey guys, like, what are we going to do right now so that we facilitate the opportunity for you to try find your true calling and purpose? Like, that's an advanced maneuver for a lot of families. They're busy. It isn't the culture of how their family grew up. So, it's a complicated question, but I think it is actually available to all of us. And we see this idea of purpose being we see it in a cross section of society around the world. So when we start to look at blue zones around the world, in Asia, in South America, in North America, in Europe, we see purpose as actually being one of the elements and characteristics in common among all these different groups. So it isn't just one culture that is leaning into purpose. It is something that is much more universal than that.
Oh, I love it. So anti-aging too.
All of the above.
All of it. It does everything. So for someone that is seeking their purpose and hasn't quite tapped into it, how might one go about that? You said facilitating conversations like this, which is wonderful because that's why I want to do this podcast.
Yeah.
So we
absolutely.
can ask what is going to make us happy in life? What is going to satisfy us? What is going to make our life worth living and be meaningful? So one is to have the conversation. Is there anything else people that are seeking or trying to figure that out? Are there any tips you have for them?
Yeah. So, I mean, listen, you can't be like, I want to find my purpose. Like, where is it? Where is it? So this is, again, a complicated question. And it's not a matter of just being like, okay, I'm putting my intention out there. Now, purpose, come to me. So the first thing I have found for individuals who are looking to start to, I'm going to just say, unlock their purpose, because I think it's within them already.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And really be able to articulate and identify what is purpose from responsibility, because it's something that we actually easily get confused.
Yeah.
Is one, you need to acknowledge that it starts with a conversation around self-worth. You have to feel that you are worth being able to pursue this piece. And so when we get caught in the busyness of life, and I'm in like the busyness of life. I've got 3 businesses, I've got 3 kids, I only have 1 husband, but I mean, I've got a lot of pieces going on. It's really easy for me to be like, my purpose is going to go by the wayside. I'm just going to focus on the responsibilities of what I have going on in front of me. But I stop because I'm like, no. Like, I'm really clear on what my mission and purpose is all about. And my ability to create space for that starts with my own sense of self-worth. So for people who are sitting there and they're like, nah, I'll get to it in 10 years, or it's not that important, we need to have a conversation, one, around the self-worth piece. The second thing is time. So a second prerequisite for us to start to look at it is you have to carve out the time to start to investigate it, to really feel the different things that you might try and the different ideas that you might lean into, and determine whether or not this is actually in alignment with you. And when you are ram-sacked and busy beyond the wazoo day in and day out, you literally will not have time to explore this idea. It takes time. You have to feel like you're worth it, and you have to be able to take the time. We all have time. We just have to move it up the priority list. So those are 2 prerequisites. And then when we start to unlock what this purpose really looks like, I want people to start with by really getting clear on what it is that they're good at. Like, what is a unique skill that you have? What is something you are inherently blessed with in terms of ability? And this does not mean it's your purpose. It just means I want you to start to create an inventory and a list of those things that you are good at. If you are having a hard time making a list, you're like, I'm not good at anything. Well, let's go back to the beginning and start with self-worth. But let's make a list. And if you need help, ask your friends and family. Ask everyone but your mom, because she's going to give you a bias list. Ask people, like, really, tell me, I'm doing this exercise, where do you see that I have these inherent skills? So one, we have to start with the things that you have talent around. What we need to do then is take that list and pare it down. We have to pare that list down so that the things that are on the list are the things that we actually love. So one could argue Andre Agassi, right? Like Andre Agassi was a tennis player with tremendous skill. And then in his autobiography, he's like, and FYI, I don't like tennis. So tennis is not part of his purpose. It might be part of the journey that enables him to unlock it, but it's probably not his purpose. He doesn't love it. So this is the cool thing about purpose and this idea of doing life on purpose. You get to do it in alignment with things you love. When you start to execute on skills that you are good at, but you don't necessarily love, we're falling into the realm of responsibility. Also important, I'm not saying we don't lean into that, but they're separate issues. So now we have things we're good at. Now we have things we love. And then the third category I really get people to focus on is of the things we're good at and of the things we love, which of those things enable us to make outward contribution?
Yes.
To move the needle on. It doesn't have to be the whole planet. We don't have to all be Gandhi. Like on our community, on our family, on our schools, on our where can we actually move into a state of contribution? And then when I talk about it in the context of entrepreneurship, I have a fourth category and I go, can we take that contribution and can we actually turn it into a state of monetization? Will people actually pay for this piece? Because my real interest, my real passion is how do we help people build businesses and build entrepreneurial endeavors that are in alignment with their purpose. And more as we move into an economy that is less predicated on job security, less rewarding of how much higher education you have, and more rewarding of those people who are willing to take risks and step forward and add value to the world, we're going to have more and more people who are going to need clarity on this, or you are going to be working without security for a huge part of your life, doing something you don't necessarily love to do.
And we'd have a better world if all businesses were predicated on people creating things that are of good impact for the world.
Absolutely.
And from the heart. Yeah. So to summarize, having the self-work to go within, tap within, find out what are your talents, what do you love of those talents that can have a positive contribution to the world. And that, when it has all of those elements, can be your purpose.
Yeah, we're starting to gain clarity on what that purpose is. And it's going to get deeper and it's going to evolve as you move forward through life. And, you know, I just want to add on this idea of responsibility here because, you know, I worked with a lot of moms and they'd come into my practice and they're like, this is amazing. My kids are my purpose. And I was like, your kids are your responsibility. They're not your purpose. In fact, I actually dealt with a lot of women as their kids were leaving home who had thrown all of their energy into this belief that their kids were their purpose. And the second their kids decided to go and find their own way, they were completely lost. See, This is the thing about your purpose, is that your purpose is a transferable entity that can move into different facets of your life. So your kids are a vehicle in which your purpose can flourish, but your children are not your purpose. That is a huge amount of responsibility you just place on your kids when you make them your purpose. Your spouse is not your purpose. It is a relationship through which your purpose can flourish, but it is not your purpose. So the thing about purpose is it is your internal and then outward gift into the world. It is not something that you take from other people. Your purpose in life is not to be an ice cream tester. It doesn't flow in. Your purpose flows out. And it's a really important distinction for people to realize because far too many people create this whole series of beliefs in their lives like, I am living my purpose. And the second that external thing you've applied your purpose to is no longer in your life, it is devastating. We see this with athletes. We see this with entrepreneurs. We see this with politicians. My purpose is my title. No. Your title and your vocation is a vehicle in which your purpose can flourish. But as soon as we make it run the other way around, we run huge risk of disappointment.
I love that. So your purpose can take many manifestations externally.
Absolutely.
There's many vehicles that you may drive throughout life, but it's really something that's within. Oh, that's so good. So what's your purpose, Meghan?
That's a great question. I don't know. No, I'm just kidding. It is a really great question. So I'm really driven by this core belief that when people have their health, they can change the world. And so I am really good and really excited and really enjoy this idea of helping people to build things, businesses that facilitate contribution into the world, and that manifests in a variety of different arenas for me. But my purpose is really helping people to understand how their skills and how their contribution can actually move the needle on the world.
And you've coined this term entrepology.
You got it.
Okay.
You got it.
So tell me what that means.
Yeah, entrepology is a word I made up because I didn't have a word that sufficiently encapsulated this interest I had in understanding the cross-section between our mindset, our health, and our business, and entrepreneurship in general, this notion of creation. And to me, that's what entrepreneurship is all about, is it's just a vehicle for monetizing on creation. And so I just really got fascinated on how these three pieces would fit together. And so, purpose is this sort of a common vernacular that we can use to understand that. But to me, anthropology is the study of what happens behind the scenes in order for that to happen.
And do you think, oftentimes we have careers tied to our purpose. Sometimes our purpose lies elsewhere. Do you think they should be one and the same, or is it possible to have a career that's not exactly our purpose and find and exhibit our purpose in another arena of our life? Or
100%. You can design your life however you want.
Really?
Yeah. It's totally up to you. I'm not going to tell you how to do it. I don't think there's a rule or a law there. I have observed that individuals who get up and go to work day in and day out, who engage in activities that are not in alignment with their purpose, do not feed their purpose, have no psychological assimilation to their purpose, that becomes soul-sucking.
Yeah.
So, I think a lot of people go to work every day because they're like, I have a responsibility. I got to feed my family. I got this purpose talk. I'll do this later. And so, my real call to action on this is can you have your cake and eat it too? I talk about this all the time. I firmly believe you can. It just requires really specific intention. So gosh, go to work every day, do your thing. But if you're going to work every day and you're like, I hate it. I hate the drive. I hate Monday mornings. I am living for the weekend. Then I'm really going to encourage you to stop and question whether or not there is a possibility or an opportunity for you to be able to pair your life's work with what you're really good at, with something that pops you out of bed in the morning, something other than your alarm clock.
Yeah, I agree. I have been thinking about this topic of satisfaction and life satisfaction and fulfillment much in the same way I think you get jazzed about purpose. Right. And I do think purpose is a central element that's maybe required. I don't want to be absolutist, but maybe required to be satisfied. I'm not sure if we can be fulfilled and satisfied in life without having a purpose. What do you think? Is it possible? Maybe not.
I don't know the answer to that question. I think there's some people who would say, I don't know what my purpose is, and I am perfectly happy. And listen, again, great. Great.
Yeah.
I don't want to break apart something that is not working. We put together something we call the Anthropology Life System. And what we found is there's sort of 8 categories that we really have an opportunity to act on it and reach fulfillment within. Purpose is just one of those 8 categories. And so far, maybe there's more, but so far what we've really found is that there's sort of 8 core areas that we can start to focus on in our lives and have the opportunity to grow into a state of fulfillment. Purpose just happens to be one of them. It's one of the things I want people to be aware of that's on the table in terms of this total fulfillment. It's also not in contrast to what you say, it's also not the only thing. So you can't just be I agree. I get up every day and I'm totally living life on purpose, but I have zero financial autonomy and it's happened at the expense of my relationships. And I'm not engaged in any sort of personal growth because everything's about my purpose. What happens then is we're out of balance. So, I think it's part of a system. I think that it adds to the completeness. And I suspect there are lots of people walking around not unhappy, and yet they have not necessarily been able to identify or articulate what their sense of purpose is. I just think it's an expedited route.
Yeah, I think there's definitely many areas in addition to purpose. Purpose feels like a big one to me.
It feels like a big one. There's lots of happy people who don't have their health, right?
Yeah.
They're like, whatever. It's not my priority. It's not my thing. It wasn't a value that was placed upon me as a kid growing up. No problem. It's just part of that balance. It's part of that balance piece. I think all of these things start to come together into fruition to help us fully optimize what our life could look like. And when happiness is just one of the metrics that we can use. And so, this conversation is so much more complicated than, can we be fulfilled and complete without one of these elements? If you don't even know one of these elements exists, then probably.
But it's good to take inventory on these different elements and go within and take the time to address, like, am I living in a way that is fulfilling? And if not, how do I realign to do that?
Totally. And, for me, like, I mentioned the moms. I remember I had one patient in particular, and this is where I actually really started to look at it, but she had 3 kids and they finally, her husband wasn't in the picture anymore. And her kids left home and she was like extremely depressed. She was like, I've been so happy my whole life. Like, what is going on? She's like, my kids visit me once a week for family dinner. Like, I still see them. I'm involved at the golf club. And I'm sitting in my head. I'm like going through all my medical checklists of things that we would think of when we're talking about, does someone have, social security and a social network and all these pieces. I was like, oh my gosh, she's checking all the boxes. Like, and I don't think she's just paying lip service. She legitimately has those things. And that's when I was like, oh, she has no sense of purpose. Like, she sits on committees at her golf club, but she really couldn't care less. Like, she's like, meh, if I'm there, I'm not there. My job, I'm really good at it, but like, does it move the needle on the world in a positive way? Nope. Gives me access to my life. Like, she really was missing that thing that made her feel of value. And she had always received it from her kids by proxy. It was never her purpose. It just filled that void for her. So, it might not be something that is interrupting your state of happiness now, but it's just something that I want on people's radar to understand moving into the future.
Yeah. And speaking of the internal purpose and then the external ways in which we display that, I want to share my dream, because my purpose came to me in a dream, and it was quite interesting and a little kooky. People will get to know me in that way, I think, through this podcast. Literally, the heavens spoke to me and said, Sarah, like it was a group of heavenly beings.
I love that.
Your purpose is to make the non-mainstream mainstream through authenticity, spontaneity, and humor. And I woke up. I'm still figuring out what that means in terms of the vehicles and the way in which I do that outwardly. I love how you've described that, because at the time it felt kind of vague. I thought, wow, this is amazing. And it was a very clear statement. But what do I do with that? Right. Exactly. Like, I still have to decide what that means to me and how do I manifest that through what I'm doing in the world, I guess. But that would be, as you describe it, those outward vehicles, right, that I get to drive, whether I create a podcast or be a doctor or dance or do different things.
Totally. And I think there's kind of like a purpose backpack where you can be like, here's my purpose. And you're like, oh, which then opened up this increased awareness of something else that my purpose is. Like, it can be, I think sometimes we see these things through a microscope and we're like, okay, here are my things. And then as we get good and as we lean in and as we start to engage, we can increase that field of view, and we can realize that, oh, this can have influence and it can have tentacles and it can reach so many other areas. So it's an evolution. That's what's exciting and fun about it. Yeah,
it's not locked. It gets to change and evolve. So Meghan, are you satisfied and fulfilled?
I am satisfied and fulfilled. I mean, that does not mean that I don't have days where my kids are driving me crazy and I'm overscheduled and I've said yes to too many things. Like, those are all still part of one's ongoing state of growth. But it was funny. I sat at the breakfast table this morning with my daughter. She's like, I hate Mondays. And I'm like, I love Mondays. What do we need? What needs to change here so that you have the opportunity to love Mondays too? So, despite the fact that we can just have still real life stress, this doesn't make you immune to real life. Like, I look forward to Monday morning. I love how I get to have contribution in this world. And that's what I hope for my kids, is that they can wake up at this stage of life too and feel that way about the work that they get to put into the world.
And you've worked to set up your life and create a life where you're in alignment on Monday morning, and what you're doing in your work is feeding your passions. So
100%. I say yes to like slightly too many things, but I've gotten much better at saying no to things that aren't in alignment with where we're going.
Right. Well, let me ask you this. This is a good follow-up to your personal satisfaction. Is there a next stage for you in deepening your satisfaction in life? Is there a next step for you where you want to take things in terms of, you've come this far and you've created a very fulfilling and impactful life? Is there another level? Like what are you looking at into the future?
Okay, so my answer has to be, of course. Like, I think that when you're not growing, you're like, what's the point, right? So yes is the quick answer to that piece. Do I have complete and total clarity on what that looks like? I don't. I know one of the things I would really love to have in play in the next 10 years or so is I'd love to run an incubator for female-led businesses that really harness the intersection of the things that are important to us with respect to anthropology. It fosters a place where we can fully optimize and continue to work on our mindset that is respectful of the role that our health and optimal health have to play in our ability to fuel our missions in the world, and that helps women in particular, and I'm happy to go into that, but helps women in particular build businesses of impact.
Yeah, tell me more about that in terms of women in particular.
I think that, listen, I'm very happy for men to have awesome businesses, or anyone who identifies with any gender to have any kind of business. I believe that women have this physiological predestined capacity to create. It's what we inherently do. I think we are excellent at running businesses. I don't think we necessarily have access to the same opportunities that men traditionally have in terms of funding, in terms of access to debt financing. It's more expensive for women to take on debt than it is for men. I think it's harder for women to find mentors in these arenas. And what we do is we default to our traditional coping mechanisms, which is to push harder and work harder and sacrifice ourselves in order to make things happen. And I really want to change that culture with respect to building businesses and with respect to how women have and experience success and facilitate contribution in the world. So, next level, like, what do I really want to do? That's what I ultimately really want to do. To me, that feels like an amazing manifestation of the work that I've been able to put together thus far. But who knows? Who knows what purpose-driven decisions over the next 10 years are going to lead me towards?
Yeah, I want to be in that incubator. When is that happening?
2031.
Okay, it's declared. I'll follow up with you on that.
Put it in your calendar.
Meghan, to wrap things up, is there any question that you've never been asked before, that you've always wanted to be asked, something that you really want to share that you've not had the opportunity to share yet? I know you've done a lot of speaking and podcasting and whatnot, but is there anything you might have expressed? You've already probably expressed a lot of it, but is there anything in particular, any last burning something?
Pearls of something? I love this question because I always find that when I'm in a scenario, I'm like, I wish they just asked this.
Right. Well, that's the opportunity right now. Why didn't Dr. Murphy ask about what?
Listen, I think that for me, more than anything, I really want people to know, I want women to know, I want anyone to know, you have permission to lean into the creation of your ideal life.
Yes.
And I think in particular, I'm just going to speak to women I don't mean this in any kind of binary context, but we've kind of waited for permission. We wait to be discovered. We wait for someone to tell us you're good enough. We wait on things. I waited on things. I had this belief that my 40s are going to be like this golden era. And I waited on like all these things the way I wait to wear a dress and don't take the tags off. And then I'm like, oh, I don't like the dress anymore. Like, I literally waited to execute on things until I was in my 40s. And I was like, what the heck was that? Like, it was like I gave myself permission to only fully explore things when I got to that stage of life. And it is one of my biggest regrets. And so, my message to everyone is stop waiting for permission. Like, if this is what you need, permission happened today, but pursue and lean into those things that you love and live without regret and go build that stuff that you have envisioned building. No one is going to come and tap you on the shoulder. Tap yourself on the shoulder, step into the ring, and leave the world better than you found it.
Oh, I love it. That's such an inspiring final message. So to the audience out there, I'd love if you'd message me. I want to know, what have you been waiting for permission to do? What is that thing that you have not done yet that you know you want to do and you just need to go out and do it and get it now? Shoot me a message. Let me know. That would be wonderful. I'm curious to hear from you. Meghan, if people want to be in touch with you further, how can they be in touch with you?
Yeah, so the best place to kind of hang out with me would be on my Instagram, which is just at Dr. Meghan Walker, Meghan with an H. And I'm always rambling on about something on my own podcast, which is the Entrepology podcast.
Wonderful. Well, Dr. Meghan Walker, it's so lovely to have you here today. I hope to have you back sometime in the future. And thank you so much for joining us and sharing all your pearls of wisdom.
Thanks, Sarah. It's been my pleasure.
Okay, bye. Thanks for listening to the Are You Satisfied podcast. Links for any mentions from this episode are available in the show notes. If you'd like to connect with me, go to drsarahmurphy.com. That's drsarahmurphy.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast. Definitely tell all your friends about it and leave a review. See you next week.